Well, after part one of the response to Tito, I got a highly emotional reaction to the so-called debate. And it went back and forth in the comments section. It got kind of wild for a minute, and I wasn't going to post part two. I was going to let it be and let it die down, because normally my channel, this is not what I do and this is not what I'm about. But one of my 3 subscribers interceded, and thankfully so, a brother with wisdom said, even though he agreed with Tito, he said that we should rationally discuss what went on and give an analysis. So while I want to thank the brother, one of my 3 subs, for bringing the discussion back down to rationality. So the other clips of Tito's rant, I'm not going to put up. I'm not going to knock down any more of his so-called evidence. I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to leave those clips out, and I'm going to do what I normally do. So I'm going to end the debate, and I'm going to do what this channel normally does, which is inform. As the great black scholar John Henry Clark once said before he started so-called debate with a white anthropologist, and I'm going to repeat it here. I only debate equals. All others I teach. So I'm no longer going to debate Tito. And I'm going to do what Made by Ruben asked me to do, which is teach him. The reason I'm on YouTube and the reason I have a channel or a couple of channels is not to make money. It's not even to get a whole bunch of subscribers and views. It's to interject what I do on the outside world, outside of YouTube, which is analyze. That's what I do with my study group. That's what I try to bring to my channels. That's why I set up this IBMOR channel, because I was asked to bring what I do to the group, to give answers to what folks, especially black folks, that's who I really work for, answers to the questions they already asked. Those answers already exist. They're out there on the internet. They're in books, they're in publications, they're in videos. What's missing is analysis. Nobody knows how to connect the dots and put these things together to where they're understandable, which is a lot of what I do. What Tito's asking is something I have been working on for maybe the last 2 or 3 months. And it's something that I'm planning on doing a series on, which is what happened with the baby boomers and what happened with civil rights, and why is the black community where it is now. Now, I've done a few videos on that already, some on this channel, some on my MGTOW channel. What people and scholars often do is silo themselves. They only look in one spot for the answer, and that's where they stay. But the solutions lie in different factions: economic history, political history, social history, and even environmental history. If you don't understand all the places where the answers lie, you'll never connect the dots. And then there's a lot of scholars, black and white, that discuss these issues behind our backs and behind closed doors and in places that you'll never look. But they'll never come out and bring that to the public in the light of day where you can see it. That's why my channels exist. So now that my opening rant is over, I'm going to get into what I do, and I'm going to teach. Here we go.
It's hard not to be aware of some statistics about what's happened to family structure, not only in the United States, but throughout the industrialized world, that is to say, Europe and Japan. Japan is an exception, but in every other industrial country, the percentage of births born out of wedlock has escalated out of sight and in unbelievable numbers. I'll give you some in a second. And so all of these nations have a situation in which there are very large numbers of what used to be called illegitimate births, and now are called out-of-wedlock births or non-marital births. And the United States is no exception. It's not, in fact, the highest, but let me just give you some numbers. When Moynihan wrote his report, which in part was about the problem of illegitimacy, which, by the way, he used because everybody used it. Today, of course, it's a very, very politically incorrect word, but we don't use it anymore. But in using it, he used a word that everybody, including demographers, used. But it doesn't matter what it was called, out of wedlock or illegitimacy non-marital. 23.6 of black babies born in 1963, which was the latest data that he had when his report was written in 1965. 23.6%, almost a quarter of all black births at that time were born out of wedlock. The percentage of white births born out of wedlock in 1963 was 3. So there was a multiple here of 8, 3 versus roughly 24. Most recent data that I have for the United States today suggests that 72.3% of black babies are born out of wedlock. This is a figure, it crested at around 70 in the mid-90s, rising very rapidly from the 23.6 in 1965, and it's been reasonably stable but inching upwards since the mid-90s, and it's 72.3, I think, last year. The white numbers is 28%. That's gone up from 3. So that's gone up a multiple of 3 times 9 or so, 9 times, whereas the black has gone up from 23 to 75 or 3 times. The white rate's gone up much faster, but of course it started at a very low level, and it's still way behind that of the black rate. The overall percentage of births born out of wedlock in 2009 or 10 is around 41%. So 4 out of every 10 babies today in the United States are born out of wedlock. This still puts the United States a little bit behind Sweden and Iceland and a few other countries. We are, I think, 7th in the world in this respect. A lot of countries clustering in the 40% range. Iceland being an outliner around 60, and Sweden and some of these others being in the high 40s or low 50s. But the black rate of 72.3 is higher than it is of any other country's rate, and I think higher than the rate of blacks' rates in other countries, although I don't have good numbers for those. So it's clearly a dramatic statistic. And I have some other numbers. In 2007, there were 1.7 million, if you want to see it in terms of numbers instead of percentages, 1.7 million out of wedlock births in the United States. At that time, roughly 40%. It's now 41. Some other numbers here. 81% of first births to black women today are out of wedlock. The percentage of black births in various inner city areas is around 90 in many inner city areas today. 70% of black marriages in the United States end in divorce versus 47% of white marriages. So we have an overall divorce rate of around 50%. Only 39% of black women ever marry. More than 50% of children in single-parent families, whether white or black, are judged to be impoverished by the official government statistic of poverty, which most people think undercounts the number for reasons I won't get into. So we have a situation which statistically is quite striking. And Moynihan, in his report, predicted that the situation was rapidly getting worse. And that if something weren't done about it, we would be in a very bad situation. He was, however, surprised as he grew up and entered the Senate. He died in 2003 to find the numbers moving as rapidly as they were, and became aware, as demographers were and others were, that it was an international problem of advanced societies. The essential reason for it is what demographers and others call the decline of marriage. It's not necessarily that poor women are having more children or that they're having more sex. That's always hard to judge. It's that they're not getting married as much. And so in trying to figure out why this is happening, one wants to know why marriage has lost its power and why the stigma of having an illegitimate child, and the word tells you, has virtually disappeared in most Western societies. It is not a big deal anymore. You cohabit, which again would have been unthinkable for the most part in the 60s, early 60s. And maybe you have a child, or maybe you don't have a cohabit and you have a child. And no big deal. Except it's a very big deal for the children, because the vast majority of single families are headed by women, and the vast majority of them are lower class, whether white or black. and the vast majority of them don't have skills or don't have jobs, or if they did, had to raise the children. But this is all familiar to you, but it's this development over time, together with my interest in poverty, which got me to write this book.
The clip that you just saw was from the Woodrow Wilson Center's presentation of James Patterson's book, Freedom is Not Enough, about the Moynihan Report and its effect on the history of public policy in the United States. What he's talking about in the clip is the problems of the family structure that was first noticed by Moynihan in 1965 and was later found to be a systemic feature of advanced economies in the West. As it turns out, high out-of-wedlock births, or illegitimate births as it was known back then, were not an isolated phenomena in a small segment of United States population. As I say, it turned out to be systemic. And as time wore on, it was found out that the United States were and are not the highest or worst on this particular list. Like he said, they're seventh, with the highest country being Iceland at 60%. So as he says, what the demographers found out that was behind this particular feature or phenomena was something else that's also systemic, which he calls the decline of marriage. This is something I noticed 2 years ago when looking at the charts of birth rates in history across the world when I was studying the demographic cycle on my own. These phenomena are the direct result of the Industrial Revolution. A lot of these symptoms that we see started in the late 18th century in Scotland, where the Industrial Revolution started. The decline in marriage was preceded by the decline in the fertility rate of women in industrialized countries. So the decline in marriage and the decline of the family structure, the nuclear family structure in Western civilization, has been going on for over 200 years now. Now, the reason you see these numbers and these effects exacerbated amongst the population of the then called Negro or the black community is because of our broken culture, which is something else that Moynihan talked about in his report in 1965. Black folks have never had a chance to repair their culture coming out of slavery. With the Jim Crow policies that followed slavery and the virulent racism that black folks face, the black family could never become cohesive and coherent. The single family or the nuclear family is not organic to black culture or African culture. Large extended family kinship is what is practiced in Africa and indeed most of the rest of the world. The nuclear family or the single family is a feature of European culture, which the black community still has not really adapted itself to, and less so 50 years ago, coming out of Jim Crow with the advent of the civil rights legislation. Out of wedlock rates were always at least twice what the white population was. The divorce rate is and was always at least twice what the white population is. So too was the separation rate, what back then they called the abandonment rate, where black families split up, but because of finance, they couldn't afford to get a divorce. Separation or abandonment was always called the poor people's divorce. And it is and has been for at least 100 years a feature of black culture and of black family structure, especially in urban centers where black male employment was high. Male and female separation is always high in urban centers and amongst urban living. And because of black Americans' culture, broken culture, it's especially high and especially systemic. So it's not a matter of who and what dropped the ball or what could have been done. It's a mere fact that when the environment changed, the institutions that we have formed over 10,000 years also changed. Family composition and family patterns had to change with the changing environment and the advancement of the industrial countries. So when we talk about broken families are not new. Broken families go up back 300 years with black folks being enslaved. Black males being emasculated goes back 300 years. The cult of the black matriarchy goes back 300 years. Those things and those features have never gone away. There is and there never has been a patriarchy in the black community. Patriarchy has never been part of the black subculture in the United States. So it really doesn't matter how much money you make or what institutions you put in, it's not really going to change the culture. One is because you never had it, and two is because the current environment does not and will not support it. The Industrial Revolution has been slowly killing the patriarchy for the last 200 years. Feminism is not a cause. Feminism is a symptom. The breakup of the nuclear family is a symptom. Out of wedlock births are a symptom. They just happen to be worse in the black family and the black community. Because of our broken culture, we are most vulnerable to it. So all the finger pointing, hand waving, neck rolling, slut and bitch shaming is not going to do any good. The United States policies have tried to adjust to this change. And when they adopted feminism, instead of arresting this development, what they did was exacerbate the development. Piecemeal social welfare has only made things worse. They're throwing money trying to fix a problem that can't be fixed, instead of doing what other countries are trying to do, which is adapt the culture and the policies to the environment. The United States has done the opposite. It just happens to affect black people more. It shows up in our divorce rate, which is over 70%. Some say 70, some people say 80%, with another 5 to 10% that are separated. When you look at numbers like that, who the hell is going to get married? The black matriarchal system is incompatible to the white system on the outside. And we're taught to compare ourselves to white people. Our family structures are different, and us trying to adapt to an incompatible system has met with a lot of disaster, a lot of broken families, lots of dysfunctional children. That's why the social programs that work for white people don't necessarily work for black people. And sometimes they make it even worse. So when young folks complain about their family structure and how their fathers treated them, to say that it started with the baby boomers is false. The fact is, it's always been that way. W. Du Bois noticed that back in 1890 when he did the Philadelphia Negro. As a lot of black psychologists have said, the black community exists in a web of pathology, a web of cultural pathology that's never been fixed. If you can't fix that, you can't deal with that. We can't own up to what's going on with us and admit that our culture is broken and try to fix it. Anything else that we try, especially in this country, is doomed to failure. That is why we can't come together. That's why our families have issues. That's why we're at each other's throats as far as male and female. And that's why sometimes it's hard to be married interracial. We carry that cultural pathology with us every place we go. It's something that we have to fix, and pointing fingers and blaming each other is not going to. We can call each other out on our bullshit, but at the end of the day, even that won't do any good. The only thing it does is at least get us to look in the mirror and notice that there's a problem. People say that the baby boomers dropped the ball. I tell them bullshit. It's been 50 years since the baby boomers rose up and did what they did. In those 50 years, there's been 2 generations that haven't done a goddamn thing. In fact, you've done less. You've made the problem worse. Up there calling each other bitches and hoes and niggas and whatnot, something that it took us 30 years to stop. Y'all screwing everything in sight, and then try to blame it on mama and daddy. Baby boomers fucked up. That's true. They didn't correct the problem. Guess who's on deck and who's got the mic now? And what are you doing with it? I'll wait.